All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Isaiah Toney. I'm Deputy Director of Campaigns with eBase, the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy. And we're part of the Oakland United Coalition that's fighting for community benefits here in Oakland. Today is our community update on the Howard Terminal project and community benefits. And we've got members of our coalition here who are going to share updates with folks. And in just a second, I'm going to ask folks to introduce themselves. We have a couple of kind of housekeeping items to start with. One, if you are an attendee and you wish to speak, please raise your hand like Melvin has. And I'll make sure we call on you at the right time without waiting too long. We've got pauses for questions and feedback from attendees and panelists scheduled into our agenda. Yeah, we're looking forward to talking to folks and talking about what we can do to support community benefits in this project. So I'll pause here and ask if we can have our panelists introduce themselves. So let's start with Rachita, and please tell us your name and your organization, your role, and your pronouns. And to share my pronouns, I'm Isaiah. I use he, him pronouns, and we'll pass to Rachita.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachita Rawal. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with eBase. And yeah, I'm the communications manager with eBase. I will, pass it on to Sabir.
Hey, good morning, everyone. He, him pronouns. Sabir Lockett, Director of the Faith Alliance for a More Economy at eBase, Oakland United Steering Committee member. I'll pass it to Dolores.
Hello, my name is Dolores Tejada. I'm the lead organizer with East Bay Housing Organizations. I will toss it to Shana.
Hi, good morning. I'm Shana Lazaro. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the legal director at Communities for a Better Environment, one of the Oakland United member organizations. I'll pass it over to Sonia. Hi, Sonia. I don't know if you're able to unmute and introduce yourself.
Cool. We will come back to Sonia. So we did have a question from Melvin. So we're gonna open up so you can.
No, I didn't have a question. I just appreciate the forum. Okay, this is something that needs to be talked about in the communities in which we live and work. One of the things the question was about, have you guys get any investigation on the existing terminal at the Coliseum and what has become of that thus far?
Yeah, thanks. So folks may know that the A's are currently at the Coliseum in East Oakland, and that their plan to move into Howard Terminal is also planned to move out of the Coliseum, which would be the last major tenant there. We think of that as a separate project. Our coalition, the Oakland United Coalition, was actually formed to work on Coliseum issues. And right now, we're focusing on Howard Terminal because it feels like it's a critical moment. But we have a similar kind of campaign designed around community benefits for the Coliseum project. So I think that's something that we'd love to talk to folks more about. And we think of it as slightly distinct from Howard Terminal. but thanks. So Melvin, I think we're gonna move on to our next slide, and then at the end, if you've got more questions about Coliseum, we'll definitely want to follow up with you. Thanks. Cool. All right, so like I mentioned, our Oakland United coalition, it was formed before Howard Terminal was a proposal that we knew about. And in 2019, we took on the charge of ensuring that the Howard Terminal Ballpark project development would meet necessary standards that Oakland community needs. So our coalition is a coalition of organizations representing residents, faith leaders, workers, youth, and collectively we represent tens of thousands of folks here in Oakland who know that when development is done right and centers the needs of community, that it can uplift all of Oakland and create good jobs, healthy and safe communities. So today, our understanding is that the final development agreement for Howard Terminal is likely to come up sometime this year in the next few months. And so that would be City Council approving the development agreement, which it contains specifics on what community benefits folks are going to see come from the project. So with Oakland United Coalition, we're fighting for community benefits, right? We're trying to make sure that as much community benefits are part of the project and part of the development agreement as possible. And we know that that can't happen without folks in the community fighting for those community benefits. We know that developers, don't decide to make development the best possible for residents without residents really holding them accountable to it. So we've got folks from Oakland United member organizations who are going to give presentations on our priority community benefits. And after each of those sort of brief presentations, we'll take questions from folks and hopefully help folks get some clarity about where things are and what we can do in the next few months to make sure that we maximize community benefits. All right, next up, Sabir, are you down to do our brief?
Yeah, hey, thanks. Yeah, so I want to give a brief breakdown of like some significant impacts with the Howard Terminal project that has occurred throughout the process. So in the spring of 2018, the Port of Oakland and the Oakland Athletics signed an exclusive negotiating agreement. And what this meant is that it began the process of designing the baseball stadium and mixed-use development at Howard's Terminal on a Port of Oakland property. In January 2020, the city of Oakland began its Howard's Terminal Community Benefits Steering Committee process. And that process was centered around developing a set of community benefits recommendations centered on community process. July 21st, 2021, Oakland City Council passed this its term sheet, and term sheet kind of set forth the basic understandings of what the community benefits should be. And then in January 2022, that was the start of the conversation on the community fund and operations jobs policies. And what that basically meant is that, so the city of Oakland consulted Solano advisors, led a stakeholders process on community fund that would fund community benefits. Also, the Port of Oakland began a stakeholders process to recommend operations job policies to the Port Commission and the City Council.
Cool, thanks. And Sabir, would you mind sharing a little bit about the Community Benefits Steering Committee process?
Oh, for sure. So as Isaiah pointed out, Oakland Night took a real interest in the community benefits process that the city created. We really engaged in good faith. We had several members participating, all in the areas where we are concerned around housing, around jobs, as well as environmental impacts. We believe all these things are very important for the process. And, we did, for example, they had a topic cohort process, which engaged community at large around several different areas of concerns with community benefits that would later lead to a steering committee, like chair, a 21 body steering committee that was both represented by a community subject matter expert as well as a community directly impacted individual as the city's desire to actually engage community as a whole. We would later create a form of recommendations. All of these recommendations coincided with the Oakland United's actually platform and disposition that we would hold. And then that process would later end in a set of, let's see how this went, but it would later end. And then, so for Oakland United, we felt a very deep concern that we still need to engage in that process. Even though, the A's kind of, backed out of what they committed to do by, engaging the community and trying to hear from community. And we felt it really important to continue to engage both on a city level, on a port level, and directly with the A's.
Great, thanks, Sabir. So, this project has been active for a while, and there have been, a few different efforts to make sure that community are weighing in. And we know that this year, folks have been saying that they feel a little disconnected. So we're interested in, kind of making sure folks have updates and can get answers when there are more questions. So please, if you've got questions that come up, ask them in the question and answer function within Zoom. You can also raise your hand to ask a question. There may be some questions we don't have answers to, and we will write them down and make sure we get answers to folks. And then we're going to go through these three priority areas for community benefits, starting with affordable housing, then looking at environmental issues, and finally jobs policies. And I know that there are other areas that folks are interested in with the project. We'd love to hear, what other questions folks have, but these are what we have updates on for now. So send us a note if there's something that you're interested in learning more about that's not on here. Cool. And then next up, Dolores is going to share with us about the affordable housing community benefits.
Thank you. As I said, I'm with East Bay Housing Organizations. We're a coalition of organizations who build affordable housing, as well as members in our community who care about affordable housing. So let's go back. I think there's one. Is this the first slide? Okay. Okay, so it's just saying my internet is unstable. So if I cut out, please let me know. So what are the affordable housing conditions in Oakland? Those of us who live in Oakland and even in the Bay Area, understand that housing is the major need that is really impacting our communities. And so how does the city work towards supporting more affordable housing? Well, there is a process with which the city could do more to promote and protect and produce affordable housing. And so one of the statistics that I wanted to highlight is that during 2015 to 2023, the last housing element, the city of Oakland approved for every 9 market rate units, only approved one affordable housing unit. So that is 88% market rate housing and only 12% affordable housing. So that really shows that we have market rate housing being built at a really fast pace, being approved to be built, and also being built with much more frequency than affordable housing. And so that shows us that we need to invest and need to be able to produce more affordable housing to meet the need of the people who live in Oakland and who want to stay in Oakland. So what have the A's publicly committed to in terms of this development site? The A's have committed to at least meeting with the city council affordable housing requirements, but that's only if the city is able to give them enough tax breaks. So that is a huge kind of stipulation of what the A's want to do, or how they want to support more affordable housing happening in the city through their development and their project. Next slide, please. So City Council, the CBA Steering Committee, and Oakland United agree on a couple different points. First, we agree on how much affordable housing should be built, 15% on-site, 25% off-site, and how long it should be maintained for, which is at least 55 years, the initial phase of 55 years. We also agree that building affordable housing should happen at the same pace as market rate housing. So when ground breaks on market rate housing, it should also be breaking for affordable housing to be built at the same time. And so what we really need support from City Council on is a couple different things. First, on defining that the offsite development should happen within 2 miles of Howard Terminal, and this is to specifically reflect the area that is most impacted by Howard Terminal. And so that when we say offsite housing, we want to make sure that it's going to best serve the people in West Oakland who really need that housing and who may be impacted by different various aspects of the development. The next thing is that we want the city to fund tenant protection services at $1.5 million per year. And this is to ensure that that people who are housed in West Oakland can stay housed in West Oakland and aren't displaced by the various different aspects of what happens when new development comes into the area. Last, we want to require that 60% of the units be multi-bedroom to ensure that there is family access. So we want to agree on the size of what the housing should look like. And so those are some of the City Council aspects that we still need support on, including we also want to talk with them more about what the affordability levels look like with the units, so that the affordable housing is affordable to people who are at a specific AMI level. And that's all.
Cool, thanks. So I think now is a good time for questions on affordable housing. So if folks have questions, you can drop them into the question and answer section. Oh, I see there are some here that I have not caught. So we'll start taking some of those questions, and folks, please drop more questions in the question and answer section if you've got them. So I'm going to look and see if there's questions specifically about affordable housing, and we'll make sure to catch the rest of the questions towards the end. So I see one question here: how will the offsite housing be paid for? The condo fees may or may not happen and could be delayed for decades, which means the community gets nothing or the city has to find another way to pay for it. The Giants did 40% affordable and are responsible for financing all of it. Why shouldn't Oakland get the same deal?
That's a great question. So the offsite housing, there's multiple different sources, but really we're looking for the city and the A's to commit to what those sources are. We also believe that the A's should be paying for affordable housing. The the condo conversion fees may or may not happen. That I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I'm sorry, I think you mean the condo fees when they're sold. I guess that rate of funding basically, I think, just comes from statistically from like natural ways that people buy and sell houses. And yes, I also agree that it can be delayed for decades. There is the opportunity to support an infrastructure financing district. So that is one option that the city and the county are both looking at. And yeah, I mean, there is some really great examples in San Francisco around affordable housing and around major developers supporting the affordable housing aspect through funding it out of pocket. And I definitely believe that the A's can be doing more to contribute to affordable housing, because right now they're not really doing anything. So yeah.
Great, thanks. So next question we have here is, how do you define affordable? Extremely low income?
For this particular project, we have affordability levels. We would like all 35% to be 60% AMI and below, with a certain percentage, I believe 20% being 30% AMI and below, and 10% at 20% AMI and below. So it begins at least 60% AMI, with a portion of that serving people with 30% AMI and below. And that's math that is way complicated for me to like get into. That's definitely more on the practitioner side. And so that's something that if there's more specificity, I can definitely follow up around that.
Great, thanks. So a couple of questions are kind of similar to each other. But this next one is, has the city passed a law requiring developers to dedicate a certain percentage of their housing units as affordable? And this is different from the agreement between the city and OU and the CBA steering committee.
Trying to find that question. There is a law in Oakland where housing must be built if there's a market rate development taking place that has over a certain number of units, then it should include affordable housing. And if it doesn't, then the developer is required to pay what's called an impact fee and that money goes towards affordable housing through the HCD department. So that basically means that, like, yes, there is a requirement that if you're going to build market rate, you have to build some affordable housing. And if you don't, you can either one, integrate it into your building, or two, pay a fee that will then be dedicated towards affordable housing through other developers being able to apply for it. And that's a whole other like issue, because there is some difficulty with collecting that fee, and also at what intervals the developer can pay it. Right now, developers can pay it a portion before they break ground, and then a portion when they're like at a certain point in the process. And so EBHO is actually doing advocacy to ask for that impact fee at the beginning of the process, so that there can be more funding available sooner to build affordable housing.
Great, thanks. I'm going to keep us moving along here. I think the next new question is, what is included in the offsite housing? Is that new construction?
It can be a combination of various different methods to meet the needs of people who need affordable housing. So it can be new construction, it can be acquisition and rehabilitation. So if there's a building that can be converted into affordable housing, then that can happen as well. And there are also various different other methods that EPO is supporting, such as the home ownership program that the CBA proposed.
Great, thanks. The next question here is about the $50 million for affordable home ownership. And that is still part of Oakland United's platform. Our list of affordable housing sort of priorities for community benefits is much longer than I could fit all on one slide. So there are a couple of things that aren't on this list, and I'll read off a few of them. One of them is the $50 million for anti-displacement and home ownership services. One of them is leasing affordable housing units should be prioritized to local neighborhood residents, and that any residential landlord on the project must follow fair chance rental procedures that limit the use of background checks and protect against discrimination. So we've got a longer document that I can send around to folks, and you can read through that list. And let's see, we'll go to next questions. I think this next question here is, what have the A's committed to as of now? And you're on mute.
The A's have committed to speaking with the city so far. And they also have finally agreed that at least 15% should be on site. Much more recently, they were pushing back against that 15%, but the last I heard is that they do agree that 15% should be on site and affordable.
That's great, thanks. So next question here is, how does the city / OU agreement compare with previous city developer arrangements for affordable housing? So I think this is kind of, if we compared the current proposal or our understanding of what the current proposal would be with previous developments, how would the affordable housing compare?
I don't have that answer. There hasn't really been a development of this magnitude to compare it to. So I don't necessarily have that answer, but I can do some research and find out. I do know that 35% is a larger percentage than what what has happened in the past with other buildings, either smaller, that are not as large in scope as this project. So 35% is significantly more.
Great, thanks. Next question here is, has there been any talk or consideration for the port or any private companies at the port to pay for affordable housing or workforce housing, like for teachers?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I'm trying to find it in the list.
Yeah, it's 1135. Has there been any talk or consideration for the port or any private companies at the port to pay for affordable housing or workforce housing, like for teachers?
There, as far as I know about around the port, we're mostly talking with the city and So we haven't approached the port around what they're willing to do in terms of what they plan to build, but that's a good idea.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about workforce development later, but we are interested in seeing the A's themselves support the workforce development directly as a private company. But yeah, I think that's something we haven't heard discussed yet. So this next question is, does EPHO support a community fund for folks in West Oakland?
Yeah, we were a part of the city's process to to discuss what a community fund could look like. And so I think that we would support a community fund for folks in West Oakland, because that's the way that a lot of these different needs are going to be met.
Great. Next question is, doesn't the IFD only provide $50 million for affordable housing? That won't get near the 25% offsite goal.
Yeah, I don't know all the math at the top of my head. I leave that to the practitioners to keep that in mind. But what I will say is that the current iteration, where we're at now, there's not enough sources named around where affordable housing funds are going to come from, which is why I really believe that the A should be making a private contribution.
Great. Next up, aren't OCC basing their income from this whole project on income from taxes? Then they get tax break. Aren't we giving back the money? I might ask the person who put this question in to put it in again, because I don't fully understand, but I'll try my best to paraphrase. I think OCC here means Oakland City Council. And I think that the question is that if the A's get a tax break or a tax offset for the affordable housing, then that would be the city paying for it, and that it wouldn't necessarily be sort of like new resources that were brought into the equation. So I think that's what the question is. And Dolores, do you have an answer?
Yeah, so I think this connects back to the enhanced infrastructure financing district. So right now there's not really development there theoretically that's taxable. So the tax, like there would be new businesses there that are being developed. The ballpark would be there, which could also be taxed, right? So those taxes would theoretically be new to the project, but you are right in that it's basically the enhanced infrastructure financing district basically pays back the A's what they're contributing. So yes, it's like a both and. So the enhanced infrastructure financing district basically it allows the A's to give some money ahead, and then they would be reimbursed. And yeah, that's only a portion of the funding that's needed, in my opinion. So even if an infrastructure financing district does happen, I do think that the A should be making a separate contribution as well.
Great, thanks. So the next, we've got a couple more questions here, and then I think we should move on to our next topic in environmental issues. So this next question is, how does building a luxury village benefit the typical working class Oaklander? How does that help get homeless people off the street? Won't a special district provide them with cover to use all our resources for themselves? You're on mute.
Yeah, this is super complicated. Right now, why we are pushing for 35% affordable housing is because we believe that there should be a combination of different approaches to serve the needs of Oakland. So part of we did in the CBA process, we did go back and forth around, do we want 35, what percentage of that 35% do we want on-site, and what percentage do we want off-site? And so where we landed on was 15% off-site, and that could be integrated into the buildings, or it could be separate buildings. And then that impacts the cost and around how much the building will cost to be built, right? So I do think that our community benefits that we are asking for is really so that we can equalize a little bit of what the different aspects of this development who they're going to benefit, and so that it can benefit the working class Oaklander folks more. And yeah, there's different combinations of approaches and benefits that we want to use and that we want to happen with affordable housing. So it's not just affordable housing, right? We want the tenant protections as well. We want home ownership. And we know that the city also has different approaches to how they're serving the houseless population now. And so how are we going to also support the folks that are currently nearby that site and to get the services that they need as well? That's not necessarily EBHO's lane, but we want to be able to support the organizations that are doing that work as well. And won't a special district provide them with cover to use all of our resources for themselves? That's a more complicated question than I think I have an answer for. I think that ultimately there is a multitude of different ways that all these community benefits can happen. So we need to really think through what is the best approaches, what's the best combination of things that we can do so that we can, if this development was to happen, that it really does have community benefits for the community and for the people who need it most. And so again, I go back to we really want to push I really want to push the A's to do some sort of private contribution in order to really equalize the amount that the city and the taxpayers doing versus what they are willing to contribute.
All right, thanks. Next question is, the condo transfer fees will only happen if the condos are built. What if the A's decide to postpone or forego condos or sell to another developer?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to the first part of that question. What I will say is that if a condo transfer fee is applicable to the site, not by developer. So if they were to hand it over to another developer, they would still have to pay that fee.
Great. Then next here we have, does EBHO support preferences for longtime and displaced Black West Oakland residents in the affordable housing that will be built in West Oakland?
Yeah, absolutely. There's different like HUD requirements that apply to affordable housing around who can access that affordable housing. So I think because of funding and like the rules around who can be prioritized, I'm not sure of the like exact ways to there can't be like preferential treatment. So that is a really complicated thing. But you know, EBHO is supporting the homeownership asks, and that's another way to support longtime and displaced Black West Oakland residents from staying in West Oakland.
Great. Well, thanks, Dolores, and thanks, folks, for bringing your questions. If there are any other questions related to affordable housing, please drop them in the question and answer function. We will make sure to record them and follow up with folks. And I think now we're ready to move on to our next section with the environmental issues. Shauna, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you. If we could have the next slide, please.
All right.
So the proposed Howard Terminal project.
Sorry, Shauna. Would you refresh our memory for who you are in your organization?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Shauna Lazaro. I'm the legal director at Communities for a Better Environment. We are an environmental justice organization. We've been organizing in California around environmental justice issues since 1978. We've been working with communities in Oakland for about 12 years now. And we are one of the founding members of the Oakland United Coalition. So we specifically focus on what kind of environmental impacts are likely to come from proposed projects. This is our area of expertise. Looking at the proposed Howard Terminal project, it is on track to have enormous impacts to the air that we Oaklanders breathe, to the climate that we all rely on to live in, and to the land, and of course, San Francisco Bay, the Oakland estuary. And so under California law, the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, which many of you have probably heard a lot of strange things about, these significant environmental impacts have to be considered. They have to be accurately described. So the A's and the City Council are under a legal obligation to tell all of us what this project will do to our air, to our climate, to our soils, to our land, to our water, and other aspects. So they have to analyze socioeconomic impacts, they have to analyze traffic impacts. All of those potential impacts have to be described in a document called an Environmental Impact Report, an EIR. Once they've been accurately described, the A's, the project proponent, has to also talk about alternatives to the project that will have fewer environmental impacts. So they have to look at things like a smaller project or a different location for the project. And they have to choose a less harmful alternative if it will meet their project goals. And if they don't choose that less harmful alternative, they have to include in the EIR mitigation measures for each of these significant impacts. And so the A's in the city put together an environmental impact report, a draft environmental impact report that was really, really obviously lacking. In some ways that were not very surprising. So one example that I think we probably all resonate with is the Howard Terminal, the land at Howard Terminal, which has been, really part of port operations for decades. That land is pretty severely toxic. So there are a lot of pollutants in that soil. So when you talk about proposing a project where you're going to bring hundreds of thousands of people to recreate on that land, when you're talking about a project where you're going to build housing, especially the affordable housing that Dolores was just talking about, but of course, housing for anyone, we really need a solid plan for how the toxins in that soil are going to be cleaned up. So it's one thing if they're going to just say, we're going to pour a bunch of concrete on top of it. It's another thing if they're going to say, we're going to, truck it out and replace it with clean soil. There are all kinds of different plans. The EIR did not commit to any particular way of doing it. They just said, another agency is going to figure that out. So that's one I feel like really, that's one of the many lacks in this EIR. Next slide, please. So the A's, unlike for the case for affordable housing, the A's and frankly, the city has taken the position that because this EIR is being prepared and is required by law, that's where the environmental benefits are going to live, which is completely inadequate. So in addition to the failures that we have listed here, the EIR, right, so it doesn't address the toxicity of the soils. It doesn't put together a plan for how all of the increases in greenhouse gas emissions are gonna be happening to make climate change worse from moving to Howard Terminal. It doesn't address that. It says we'll figure it out later. It doesn't address the air quality impacts on the lungs of all of the communities around Howard Terminal, and frankly, all along the 880 corridor, because the trucks that are going to be displaced from Howard Terminal have to go somewhere. So the EIR has these many failures in it. Even if it weren't such a flawed document, there are other community benefits that we need to see as Oakland United and as communities. So one of the things that I think you probably all, if you've been following this in the news at all, you probably know that there are several lawsuits against the city and the A's because this EIR is such an inadequate document. Those lawsuits are ongoing. Regardless of their outcome, we need to see community benefits above and beyond what the EIR requires. So next slide, please. So these demands were developed by the OU, by the Howard Terminal Steering Committee that through the process that Sabir was describing earlier. Folks who live in the affected communities worked very hard through many sessions identifying environmental priorities. Some of these would be addressed in a good EIR, but frankly are not. Many of them would only come from a separate community benefits agreement. And so, for example, people who live in the impacted communities right now and people who are going to be living there will be impacted in their homes by increases in emissions from this project. And so we need to see that residents are being protected while we're sleeping, while we're, eating or playing in our homes. So we need indoor air quality protections. We also need outdoor quality protections. Greenhouse gas emission reductions, and we also need, and you'll see lower down on the list, related to the reductions in those emissions that are contributing to climate change. There are very serious, based on predictions from California agencies, this land is at serious risk from sea level rise, as is a lot of Oakland. So you all know it's not just special to Howard Terminal, but as a community benefit, we need an acknowledgement that all of the people who are being drawn in there and all of the people who currently live in the impacted communities are going to be suffering from sea level rise. And so we need to see community benefits to address those impacts. We also relatedly need to see meaningful investments into climate resilience hubs. We are already experiencing extreme weather impacts like we've never seen in Oakland. We need in-community resources for these climate disruptions. We have a huge need for access to nature, and the steering committee process developed out some very, I was going to say concrete, but that's not at all what I mean, some very earthy, very specific demands around increased tree canopy, increased parks and open space, and walkable streets so that people can have the health benefits of access to nature. So as you can see, these are very well thought through demands. And I think the thing that we would really need to see from the community to be super clear with the city that regardless of what happens with the EIR and the lawsuits that are going forward on that, we need community benefits beyond the EIR that address the environmental impact and that reflect the community's voice around the environment.
Great, thank you, Shauna. So we've got some time for questions. I see there's a few here in the question and answer function. Please add a few more if you've got questions. So I'll start with this first one that is asking, how is CBE working with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and incorporating their input on the environmental issues?
So I communicate regularly with both Ms. Margaret and Brian from West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project about Howard Terminal. We look to WOEP as the environmental justice organizing entity in West Oakland, and I say that frequently, always. I communicated with Ms. Margaret to get feedback on developing these demands from the steering committee process. And I'm happy, if you have more specific questions about how that's working, we're also communicating about the lawsuits, about the EIR. Yeah, we're in regular communication.
Thanks, Shauna. I think I would just add that from a coalition-wide perspective, we are interested in checking in with folks and talking about what happens in the next few steps, especially as the development agreement gets ready for City Council. So David, let's make sure we talk soon. This next question is CBE in support of the CEQA lawsuits that have been filed, and do you think the A's plans are sufficient?
CBE strongly supports the lawsuits that have been filed, and we are talking with the attorneys for the East Oakland Stadium Alliance regularly. It's a super fast track. And so the judge is set to hear those three cases on the 19th, which is like the fastest CEQA lawsuit you have ever seen. What else can I tell you about that? Yes, we are in support of the cases. I don't feel that the EIR is in any way adequate. I walked through some of the most glaring inadequacies that jump out at me, but we as CBE, working with co-counsel and then many of the Oakland United groups signed on to a very detailed comment letter that all three of the litigants of those cases relied on in their lawsuits. So yeah, we support those cases. This is not a legally adequate environmental impact report.
Great, thanks. And there's another question, we'll come back to one before it, but one related question is who has initiated lawsuits? And
sure.
what courts are they being brought in?
Yeah, there were three lawsuits that were filed. One was filed by the East Oakland Stadium Alliance, one was filed by Union Pacific Railroad, and one was filed by Capitol Corridor. They were all consolidated on the same briefing schedule in front of Judge Brad Seligman in Alameda Superior Court.
Great, thanks. Next question is that the FEIR was passed by the City Council, and what is being done now?
Yeah, so long before the draft EIR came out, the A's were busy lobbying in Sacramento and got themselves a streamlining statute. So everything has to happen very quickly regarding the EIR. So the city council finalized it. There was a very short period to file lawsuits, excuse me. And then the trial court is moving the cases as fast, as I said, as I have ever seen a CEQA case move. The statute says that the lawsuits should be finished within 270 days of filing, if feasible. I do not think that is feasible, but Judge Seligman is moving as fast as is humanly possible. We are not, CBE is legal. CBE is not one of the parties to the lawsuits, and so I can't tell you for certain what happens if the petitioners don't win in trial court. I would suspect that there will be appeals regardless of who wins. So it'll go to the California Court of Appeal, and whoever wins, I expect, will try to get the California Supreme Court to review it. It's also possible that the petitioners will win on some aspects, and the city and the A's will think that they can fix whatever the court identified as a problem quickly, in which case they would just take it back and fix it. And I can't tell you before the judge issues a ruling what would be required. Sometimes trial courts require a whole new public process and a complete redo of the environmental impact report. Sometimes it's just a little bit of paperwork pushing. So we'll have to wait and see.
And we will be very curious to see what the outcomes of that lawsuit is. So next question is, what happens to the toxic soil if Howard Terminal stays how it is? Does sea level rise affect it?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't looked at what the port plans include. Unfortunately, many environmental justice communities have significant toxicity in their soils, and those that are close to water bodies like San Francisco Bay, it's a real concern. Yeah, so that concern is a greater concern if you're planning to take that piece of land and bring people to live there, to work there, to recreate there. If it stays as Howard Terminal, there are fewer people currently being exposed to it, but yes, the sea level rise is going to happen regardless. And that soil is sitting there, it's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. All right. The next question has some background included, and I'm going to get right to the question. Would CBE support including liquidated damages from Schnitzer Steel, who currently operates at Howard Terminal, include those damages in the CBA when they continue toxic emissions? I think that's a new idea, or at least one I haven't heard of.
So CBE is working hard to ensure that Schnitzer Steel is properly permitted as a source of air and toxic contaminants. I do not see a legal nexus, which is what you would have to have for a CBA term that would apply to Schnitzer Steel. Schnitzer is not a proponent, proponent as in someone who's trying to advance, not a proponent as in someone who's excited about. Schnitzer Steel is not trying to get Howard Terminal built. And so I don't know how the city or the A's would have the authority to come in and just kind of impose stuff on Schnitzer Steel. If the city could do that, I think it would be a very powerful entity. But I'd be happy to, if you wanted to, I'll put my contact information in the chat once we're done with this section. And if you wanted to email me, I'd be happy to hear more about that idea offline.
Great, thank you. So I think there are a couple questions here that that have kind of been answered. So this next question I think we haven't gotten to yet is it true that the outcome of the lawsuits does not affect our ability to obtain the environmental benefits of the CBA?
That's true.
And sort of related to that is, how will the environmental benefits of the CBA be funded?
I mean, that so far, OU is demanding that there be environmental benefits. The Howard Terminal Steering Committee, had an entire working group dedicated to environmental benefits. But neither the A's nor the city is kind of acknowledging that anything beyond what's in the EIR is going to be part of the community benefits agreement, let alone would it come from the infrastructure finance district. Oh no, there are probably legal barriers to that. Would it come from, this pot or that pot? Or, I mean, the A's promised us a privately funded stadium. And so as far as I personally, just speaking, Shauna Lazaro here, I feel like the A's want this project. The A's need to fund the community benefits, including the environment.
Great. And then there's a couple more questions I'm trying to sort through, but I see one that's quick here. Is it illegal for trucks to park on streets in West Oakland?
CVE had a no idling campaign. Actually, West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project had a very long Ditching Dirty Diesel campaign regarding truck impacts. That is my way of saying there are different restrictions that apply depending on the street, depending on the conditions. And I don't know if you have specific streets that you want to know about. We did an entire process around truck routing in Oakland in the early 2010s, well, a little while ago. And so there are specific truck routes that trucks coming through the city of Oakland need to know about. There are only a few streets from which they are actually prohibited from driving on. Other streets probably have specific parking conditions, but that's a huge concern from this project and from the EIR, that it doesn't address in any way adequate truck parking, especially overnight truck parking.
Great. Next question is, will there be a separate and independent environmental impact report?
No, this is what we got. Sadly.
And then another question here, is the judge Brad Seligman pro ball? I'm not sure what that means. I think it means pro baseball.
Judge Seligman historically has been a very good judge. I don't think that he could be the biggest A's fan in the world. And if he sees that the law is being violated, I don't think he'll rule for the A's. We're not talking about the US Supreme Court here.
That's right. All right. So next question, I think this is our last question, is that the port is funded by public funds for private profit of shipping companies, terminal operators, and trucking industry that have polluted Howard Terminal. How and how much will these private for-profit entities contribute to the environmental remediation and sea level rise mitigation at Howard Terminal and the rest of the port?
See, this is exactly the information that we should know from the environmental impact report. And instead, the environmental impact report says the Department of Toxic Substances Control is gonna prepare a remediation action plan. And then, so that's what the draft said. And then they amended it because remediation action plan is nowhere near as impactful as what would be required to address this site. So they upgraded it. So it's going to be a raw remedial action. I'm forgetting what W stands for, work plan or something like that. So that's the place where the funding for whatever the cleanup is should be. I feel like what you're asking about is kind of a federal super fund or contributions from legacy polluters framework, which is exactly the right framework. We don't know. No one has told us that, but we should know.
Great, thanks. And then I think we're gonna take a last question and then move on to our next topic. And this question is, our council passed a resolution granting Chinatown a direct seat on Oakland Department of Transportation's traffic study and mitigation plan. West Oakland does not have a seat. Would Oakland United support equitable representation for West Oakland on the traffic study and mitigation plan? I'm not familiar with the Department of Transportation's traffic study and mitigation plan. It sounds perfectly reasonable that West Oakland should be engaged and should be a part of a body like that, especially if it's working on traffic studies and mitigations related to potential Howard Terminal ballpark project. David, do you have any more info on that you could share with us? That would be great. Or I'll say I'll make sure to follow up with you on that and get that info from you. So thanks, folks. And please, if you've got more questions, drop them into the question and answer function. I think we're going to move on to our last kind of issue area. And I'll be leading this one. So this is our operations jobs policy, community benefits. And we wanted to start out just sharing a little kind of background info for folks that, California lost jobs more than other places as the pandemic hit. And as of, I think this is from the beginning of this year, California has been recovering slower than other states. So, that Oakland is a part of that. And, we've seen lots of folks get laid off at the beginning of the pandemic. Lots of folks see, full-time work shift to part-time work or seasonal work, not pick up again in the new season. And while, some of those jobs are coming back, folks are still dealing with the impact of not having had employment and income for a year or 2 years or more in some cases. And with the A's leaving the Coliseum as they move into Howard Terminal, all of the jobs that go into, game day and the other kind of support at the stadium wouldn't happen at the stadium anymore. So that would be another place that Oakland residents and Oakland workers, might see opportunities going away. So we do have some good information about what the A's have expressed willingness to do for Howard Terminal around jobs and employment. This first piece is that the A's have committed to retaining Coliseum workers. So that's food service, janitorial workers, stagehands, folks that are in good paying union jobs, that are permanent jobs at Howard Terminal, would get to see a fair unionization process at on-site hotels as well. And this is a big deal for us. Oftentimes developers will take advantage of opportunities to lay people off and make people reapply for their job and start at the bottom of the wage scale. But this is a commitment from the A's to keep folks in the job that they have. Also, as the A's have talked about the project overall, they've cited this number of 7,000 permanent union jobs. And this comes not just from the $1 billion in building the stadium, but the other $11 billion for the rest of the project. The A's are proposing to build office space, retail, other entertainment options. If there was another performance venue, like a theater, we could see up to 7,000 permanent union jobs. I would add that we don't have specifics from the A's on which jobs those would be. There isn't clarity right now on whether or not there will be on what amounts of retail or restaurants or hotels there may be. So we're still looking forward to more details about what those jobs will be. And then Oakland United actually did have 3 direct conversations with the A's in April, or starting in April of this year. And we thought that we had fairly productive conversations. We didn't sort of get to a conclusion, and the A's have not made public commitments around that, around the operations jobs policies, but they had expressed interest in several of our demands. And we're still optimistic that the A's actually are able to make strong commitments around jobs policies, to make sure that, when Oaklanders get these jobs, that they're quality jobs, and to make sure that, local folks and folks who are shut out of other work get a fair chance here. So a few of our kind of priorities from Oakland United's term sheet on jobs policies are fair chance hire. So this would be removing, as much as possible, removing the ability of employers to do background checks and discriminate against folks who may have a criminal record. Targeted hire. This is, requiring employers to make first attempts at hiring local residents. So through our engagement with the port, we've identified and are still trying to settle on specific zip codes in Oakland that would get sort of priority access to applying for those jobs. Next up is a living wage. Oakland's current living wage policy that applies to the port was passed over 20 years ago and is basically the same as Oakland's minimum wage. So we're saying that for jobs at this project to be good jobs and to help those workers afford to live, here in Oakland, that the minimum wage for jobs at Howard Terminal should be $5 more than the current living wage, which is about $15.25 an hour. So that would be just over $20 an hour for the minimum wage for jobs at Howard Terminal. And then this last piece is community oversight. We want to see a body of appointed Oakland residents, be able to receive reports on employment at Howard Terminal, especially fair chance and targeted hire. We want to know that the policies put in place are being followed and are leading to Oaklanders getting high quality jobs. There's a few more items on there, and if folks are interested, we're definitely happy to share our memo on those policies. And if there are questions, or it looks like there are questions, so we'll start getting into those. If you've got more questions, please add them into the question and answer section. So I see a question here. Where did we end up on the West Oakland portion of zip codes 94608 and 94609 inclusion in the targeted employment area for potential Howard Terminal related jobs? My understanding is that the next step that port staff are taking is presenting the recommendations from our operations jobs stakeholder meetings to the Port Commission to get their feedback. That I believe was supposed to take place in July in closed session with the port, which means that it's not accessible to members of the public. And I have not heard an update from the port staff. So I know that they brought a proposal or a set of recommendations to the Port Commission, but I'm not sure exactly what all was in there. I don't believe that we received a kind of final document from them that included all of that. So next question here, how would jobs go away if they move to Howard Terminal? I think this is referring to Coliseum. So right now, like today, there's an A's game. So there's folks who do the food and concessions and security and janitorial work. I know that there's also folks that manage some of the technical aspects of video and running the screens at the game. So all of those folks, have jobs currently at Coliseum. And if the A's move to Howard Terminal, those jobs wouldn't exist at the Coliseum since they're working for the A's. Looking through these next few questions. Next here we have, how come it seems like Oakland United isn't concerned about the impacts on the full-time union jobs that have existed at the port and could be lost if Howard Terminal moves forward? These jobs all pay far above the minimum wage. I think I would say, we do want those jobs to be protected. Our coalition was formed around supporting community benefits in 2014 when the Coliseum City development project first became a proposal. So that's what our coalition has been organized around, is fighting for community benefits and fighting to maximize community benefits in the project. We want to see all those full-time union jobs protected, and we've listened to the port and the city and their plans to protect those jobs, and we're open to listening to concerns that folks have. So if you've got those, we'd love to be in communication. So next question here, I think, is what was the recommendation of your community with respect to those zip codes? From David, I'm not super clear on what that question is. Could you please re-ask it? next is, what year do you expect the 7,000 jobs at the office space, retail, performance venue, and hotels actually happen? So this is a great question. I do know that the A's and the city have agreed that the stadium will be built first, and then construction for other parts of the project will happen. And I think part of that is to make sure that the A's kind of have opening day ready to go as quickly as possible. So opening day at the stadium will be a certain set of jobs. And then we will, have to wait for the rest of the construction to finish for those jobs to start. And again, this is one of the things we don't have a whole lot of clarity on in terms of, when construction will finish on certain parts of the project, and when jobs would actually start in those facilities.
Isaiah, I just wanted to jump in here for this is Sonia with Unite Here Local 2850, or Local 2 now, member of the Oakland United Coalition. And I think what David was referring to with the where did you land on the zip codes was about the inclusion of 94609, particularly the Hoover Foster area within 94609 as an area that does merit targeted hire. And I think he brought that issue up when we were having some of these conversations with the port. And I think that where we landed is we do think that Hoover Foster should be included, and that was an oversight because some of the other areas in that zip code are more well off and aren't in need. But a lot of that zip code is Temescal area, which is not necessarily where you would want to focus a targeted hiring program. But I think that we would I believe that where we landed is that what I think is that we would support making sure that Hoover Foster area gets included in whatever targeted hire program happens.
Great, thanks. So David, it looks like you had raised your hand. Do you have? But then I also see you had perfect. Thanks here, Sonia, in the questions. Do you have more to ask?
No, not on this topic. I'll hold until you finish. I've got questions about cultural benefits.
Gotcha. All right. Cool. Then I think I'm going to check and see if there's any more questions on jobs. This question here, wouldn't all those jobs just move to Howard Terminal? I think typically in a process like this, it's not necessarily true that all the jobs would just move over. But I think, like Sonia mentioned, folks through their unions were able to secure commitments from the A's to protect those jobs. Okay. So I think that's the end of questions on jobs policies. Again, if folks have questions, please drop them in the chat or in the question and answer function. And I see one more hand up here in attendees, so please ask.
Yeah, I had one question about MAPLA in the question box that I don't think you got to.
Yes, thank you. Is there any move to use another structure other than MAPLA for construction? Because MAPLA doesn't prioritize Oakland residents, and residents aren't represented in the construction unions. As far as I know, MAPLA has been the conversation that folks have had. Sorry about that, folks. So as far as I know, MAPLA has been, the conversation that folks have had as far as the construction work. And for folks that don't know, MAPLA stands for Maritime and Aviation Project Labor Agreement. So it's a project labor agreement between the Port of Oakland and construction unions. So I think the answer is no, that there's not a move to use another structure. Cool. Thanks for making sure we caught that. And I think now's a good time to take some questions that folks have that might not be specifically about the 3 priority community benefits areas. So please go ahead and drop those into the question and answer. And if it works better for you to raise your hand and say it out loud, please raise your hand in All right, Public Bank, East Bay, I think you've got a question and you should be able to speak.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to know, what was the reason given for the A's saying they're stopping, their negotiations? And when did they say they would start again, or if and when they said they'd start again?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm trying to make sure I get the details right on this. So we had a meeting scheduled with the A's on a Friday, I believe a month ago. And the day before, they emailed to say that they had a scheduling conflict and that moving forward, they would be communicating with the port, and that if we had feedback, we should share it with the port. So we followed up to say, hey, we really think you should be in conversations with folks in the community. And they declined to kind of get back into conversation with us. So my understanding is that at this point, the A's aren't planning to kind of resume direct conversations with folks in the community. And folks, if your question's been answered and you can lower your hand, that would be very helpful. That way I know whose questions have been answered and who we can go to next. So I see down here, Tara Cynthia at AOL.com. You've got a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I was trying to write it out really quickly before you guys went off. My biggest question, is there any way to actually just stop the luxury village part of this whole thing? Or are we just shooting for the best that we can get? Or is there any expectation that, because the luxury village, this is not the place on port land. It's not the place for it. It's not appropriate. But I've been looking into this for a year, and it appears Libby is very influential at every level of government, because she's managed to get the EIR through very many. The original term sheet was really flawed. I've watched all these things, and it just seems like it just keeps bombing forward. Is there any hope of just stopping the luxury village privatization? Is there anything we can do?
So
sorry.
that's a advanced question. I don't know that I've heard folks kind of discussing this specifically before. My recollection is that the A's have asserted that in order for a stadium project like this to be viable, that they believe it does need the mixed use development attached to it. I'm not enough of an economist to know kind of like how much truth there is to that and how much the numbers shake out or don't. But I would guess that if the A's thought they only had the opportunity to build the stadium and not to also build the mixed use, my guess would be that they would not want to build the stadium.
Correct. So this is a land grab, and we're talking about privatizing a big chunk of Oakland, very prime property, and giving it over to a decidedly bad player. And it has to be, I'll stop. I'm sorry. I want to thank you for allowing me to be on this, and I'm very impressed with what you all are doing. I'd like to join, but anyway, I think that the biggest thing is all of these things, they're nickel and diming us and promising 12% or 15% or even 35%, for instance, housing, affordable, and which is what is affordable housing going into something that is not appropriate for the area. I mean, this luxury village thing does not do anything good for any of us. It's only going to be good for Fisher. It's very scary.
John Fisher, for folks who may not know, is the owner of the Oakland A's, and he's individually worth over $2 billion. So yeah, I think, we completely agree with you that this project, if the A's just get their way, is not going to be a good deal for Oakland. That's why we're fighting for community benefits. Affordable housing, environmental protections, and quality jobs for folks are really critical to Oakland's health in general, as well as making sure that this project doesn't displace folks further from West Oakland and from Chinatown. So I want to see if there's other questions from the two hands are up with David and Oscar.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Oscar's hand is down. David, last question. Oh, sorry, there's a few more questions. But David, yeah, you had a question on cultural community benefits.
Hey, thanks, Isaiah. As you might know, I was the co-chair of the culture and history, the steering topic cohort to the steering committee. And I've got this Black Liberation walking tour here in West Oakland. One thing that this current plan doesn't show, and this might be in this part you didn't show, are any cultural benefits. So one of the highest recommendation of our committee was for a West Oakland Cultural Center. And that was actually an amendment to the resolution that the council used to approve the FEIR. The council voted down that amendment to include a West Oakland Cultural Center. So wondering, would OU support directing the city administrator to include a cultural center in Howard Terminal? And then what other cultural benefits would be part of the OU platform, and how do you engage local community groups in developing that?
Yeah, thanks, David. So I think the short answer is that that hasn't been one of the priority community benefits areas that our coalition has worked on. Like we mentioned earlier, the coalition first came together in 2014 around the Coliseum development. And I'm sure that there's like a cultural community benefits component that we should also, be aware of at that project as well. But just based on the sort of issue area and experience and the folks represented by the organizations who are part of the Oakland United Coalition, we haven't introduced a cultural community benefits kind of issue area. So I know that's something that you and other West Oakland folks have brought up, and I believe that's in the steering committee recommendations as well. And if there are, specific pieces that folks are looking for to be added into the development agreement, definitely want to be in communication about that as well. And if there's specific proposals around a cultural center in West Oakland, I'd love to make sure that the Oakland United Coalition knows about it. Is there more information you're able to share, David?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The recommendations are in the steering committee's recommendations are in the final recommendation document. And number one recommendation was actually contributions to Gorate Land Trust, paying the SHUMI. But for, as a lifelong, just third generation West Oaklander, what would be most meaningful to this particular community, not to minimize the requirement for us to make that contribution, was the West Oakland Cultural Center. And then other than that, it was funding for local arts organizations, because, all of these things we're talking about is material important to people. But when we're talking about, displacement of longtime West Oaklanders, it is our culture that makes us distinct and unique and different. And really culture is why a lot of people have moved to Oakland. So I think unless we lead with culture in everything we do, we just become like anywhere else.
Yeah, agreed. Is there a proposal about kind of like how that would be set up? Like, for example, there's one way to set it up so that it's sort of under a city department. There's another way to set it up so that it's a little bit more independent. Is there a proposal that gets into those kinds of specifics?
No, it's not fleshed out. It's like all the other steering committee recommendations. They're just recommendations. And I think what we did is we took the explicit approach not to be too prescriptive, but to leave these, because with the understanding this is going to happen years down the road, and that we would leave these recommendations as of this point in time. They may or may not be relevant down the road for some of them, but it's not that detailed. But I would agree that if we want to see what the community really wants to see, we better make dang sure we describe it in as much detail as possible, because otherwise it's not going to happen, right? It'll get blown off to the side. I'm just a dude, right? And so need people with expertise, capability, and bandwidth to help influence and flesh that out. And we probably would want to reach out to more community cultural organizations to get them involved around, exactly the specifics and details of how that would look like. But I think if that simple directive to include a cultural center, and I would say just say at Howard Terminal, may or may not be there. And then we can figure out the details with our community, once we get more toward implementation.
Yeah, I think that's something that makes sense. There's, the community fund that has been part of the discussions and the proposal for the project, that some of the revenue streams for community benefits would sort of flow through this community fund that would have, folks appointed from the community to kind of direct. And so I could see that as an option that comes from there, or it could be set up a little differently, but definitely interested in following up with you, David.
Yeah, so I would just make this final point. Again, looking for equity. And so, Chinatown, in that FER resolution, council directed that their businesses be looked after. I mean, these are legitimate asks, right? I'm not trying to question that, but I just want to see West Oakland have the same equity. And so, West Oakland businesses have a specific line in a resolution that says their interests will be looked after. Same thing with traffic, and the same thing with culture, because Chinatown had the same thing, that this the Howard Terminal project would not impact negatively their cultural festivals and other things. And so it's just equity, for West Oakland. But I'm gravely concerned that there won't be condos anytime soon. I guess I understand they don't build condos because of the warranties around that. And then that means there's no money for the community fund. And so
yeah, that would be a risk in relying on the condo transfer fee for sure. So thanks. I think we're going to move to our last question / couple questions from Evelyn. Sorry, we haven't gotten to you yet. And then we have our last slide and we'll go ahead and wrap up. Evelyn?
Hi, happy to hear Dave on the call. We were on the cultural cohort committee together with the CBA. I'm disappointed that the city has taken a position against a cultural center in West Oakland because that was one of our priorities. However, there's something, maybe a consolation prize that's included in the legislation that authorized the State Lands Commission to remove the Tidelands Trust designation on the Howard Terminal property. And that is the inclusion of a public meeting space, a community room, if you will, at Howard Terminal, if so requested by the community. We didn't focus on that when we were in our topic cohort because we thought, well, why not ask for a cultural center? We were very inspired by the idea of a standalone resource in the community. But I would like to propose as a consolation prize that we pursue the possibility of a community room at Howard Terminal, particularly since it's something that is in the state lands legislation. So my question is, is there a way that I could advocate that? We need to get that before the State Lands Commission. I could do it as an individual, but I think that the request would have much more impact and likelihood of success if it were adopted by a community organization or a cohort, coalition of community organizations.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not familiar with the State Lands Commission, and their legislation on this. Can we connect and learn more?
Yes, I would be happy to connect.
Great.
How do I connect?
Can you, I will drop my email in the chat, and then whatever questions folks have, feel free to send me an email. And David, I've got your contact info, so I will reach out.
Okay, I think David and I are together on this concept. We were on the arts topic cohort, arts and culture keeping topic cohort together. And we want something where people can gather, because as somebody was pointing out, this is like luxury apartments, almost a resort atmosphere. And you look at the architecture of this development, they propose 600-foot tall buildings backing against the community, basically creating a solid wall against the community to come onto this public space. So to the extent that there is a bone for us in the legislation, we need to get it.
Great, thanks. So we're getting close to our scheduled end time of 1 o'clock here. We've got one more question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Carol's iPhone, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you for acknowledging me, and thank you for hosting this very informational gathering for the public to attend. My name is Carol Fife, and I am the council member for District 3, but I'm here just in my personal time because I saw that this was on Twitter, so I wanted to be here. And I just wanted to say that I feel, just for the individuals talking about the council shooting down a cultural center is completely disingenuous and untrue. And I don't think that there's time to have the discussion on this call because you are wrapping up. So I will host another forum for individuals who want to know more about the current status of negotiations with the city council and what's happening with the Howard Terminal development. But if we have to give up so much as a district without the actual investment in specifically District 3, then I don't want to do that. I don't want bones. I don't want crumbs. And I'm talking specifically to the individuals that referenced, at least we could potentially get this. We've got to stop selling Oakland short and cheering for a project that, we just heard from the facilitators of this forum that the A's are saying, talk to the port. They're telling the district representative, talk to someone else. This process has been disrespectful, not just to me as the council representative, but to the entire district and city. And they're saying if we don't get our way, then we're going to go somewhere else. And there's so many details that I can't get into right now. But I just really wanted to speak to arts and culture and race equity is one of my primary areas of focus. And I would not allow, if in my power, any project to move forward without deep investments in that. So I just want to make that really clear to the people who are listening that the council did not shoot down cultural arts. And in fact, we're making investments in that, but we got to be careful about the words that we choose. So everything is actually above board and honest. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think just to echo you, Councilmember Fife, I think everyone here is in agreement that Oakland does not deserve crumbs, and that there needs to be pretty substantial commitments from the A's around community benefits in order for this project to be beneficial for Oakland. So next up, the A's have been successful in sort of dragging this process out and ensuring that there's not enough information going out to community, not enough folks being engaged in this process. Part of why we felt the need to have this community update today is, we hear from folks that they don't know what's going on. And this is even true with A's fans. We've been talking to A's fans about community benefits and have, I think, over 200 signatures from A's fans at this point saying that they support community benefits. But when we talk to folks, they don't know what's going on. So we're trying to kind of reverse that. We know that the only way folks like us make advancements for working people in Oakland is when we fight. And right now is a time for us to reach out to our friends and neighbors and family and comrades and bring people into the fight. So we're asking folks to join us in a push through the next few months as we're expecting the city council to start looking at a development agreement vote that may happen this year. So the first item on here is our petition. Our Oakland United petition called the Our Town, Our Terms petition, details the priority community benefits that we think are critical to this project. And next, we're asking folks to sign up and pair with an Oakland United organization to recruit friends, family, neighbors to support the petition. So we have different organizations in Oakland United that focus on different issue areas that we'd love to connect folks to. And then this third piece is take action for community benefits and work with us to bring specifically 2 friends, family, or neighbors to the city council vote on Howard Terminal. And again, we don't know when that will be. That's not been scheduled yet. But we know that if city council doesn't see the masses come out and demand community benefits, that it's going to be more difficult for them to insist on the kind of support that we know Oakland communities need and deserve. So last up here is following Oakland United on Facebook for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/OU Coalition. You can find us there for updates. We'll actually be going out to A's games next week on Monday and Tuesday. We'll be starting in the Coliseum parking lot, talking to A's fans there. And folks can reach out to join us. We'll follow up and make sure we get info to folks who are interested in joining. But that's been a pretty great experience. There's lots of A's folks who have stories about being pushed out of Oakland, who support things like affordable housing with the dream of coming back to Oakland. And those are the kind of dreams that we want to support and organize with. So I think that's what we've got for today. Thanks, folks, for joining us. I am going to leave our webinar open for the next few minutes, so folks can drop in any last questions. But I think we've wrapped up our agenda, and we will be following up with folks and see you out in the streets. Thanks, folks. Take care.